As I said before, the challenges in terms of the actual translation were not particular to this book, except so far as a good writing requires care, because a good piece of writing requires care, because every word and syllable is carefully chosen, and therefore you have to bring that sort of attention to the thing you're writing. The particular challenge that comes with this, I suppose, is just to do with not the process of translating, but kind of what happens with it afterwards, to do with how you can use a project like this, which is discovering and translating these great books, and how you can kind of make the next step, take the next step, so that publishers here can find them and be enthused about them. There are particular reasons, I think, why children's books are, children's publishers in this country are resistant to writing from around the world, which I won't go into in detail here, but I think with picture books in particular, it's slightly different from fiction. With picture books in particular, so much of it is to do with an assumption that there is a certain way books should look. And the only reason this is a problem is because the people making these decisions are often in fact children. As Alex said at the beginning, with the project that Outside In World did some years ago, actually when you show books to children, they very happily will go, very quickly will go for the ones that look different, rather than the ones that have the same kind of line, the same kind of colour palette, the same kind of design and layout which they're used to. The problem we have, of course, is that books for children, especially books for very young children, are not being bought by children, they're not being chosen by children, and there are these various stages of kind of gatekeepers, is the word we use, who make decisions on behalf of, well, of course I love it, but my child would find this weird, would find it difficult, would find it funny. And it's so apparent with picture books, because at a glance you know that these things do not look like Quentin Blake, or they do not look like Nick Sharratt or Emily Granton, or any of the amazing illustrations we have here. So I think there is a particular problem with something where what you're attempting to persuade publishers to buy is very much is a visual thing. It's not just the story, it's not just a nice piece of writing that's been beautifully translated by any of us or whatever. It's something which, at an instant glance, you know this is different from what you're used to. And therefore, you have to get past this barrier of publishers and all of the other grown-ups who get in the way between us and children who we think would love these things.
Is it really the publishers or the parents? Do they even try, publishers?
Well, part of the problem, the question for those at the back is whether it's the publishers or the parents, and part of the problem is everybody is worried on everyone else's behalf. It's not as though loads of people are publishing these books and nobody's buying them. But everybody slightly thinks, well, they won't like it. Someone else won't like it. We find this with adult books as well, grown-up fiction. Last time we did a survey a few years ago, we talked to publishers, said, will you publish more books in translation? And they said, well, of course, we would love to, said the editors, but our sales team won't know what to do with it. You talk to the sales team and say, oh, translation, it's great. No, bookshops don't really like it, or reviewers don't really review it. And you talk to reviewers or bookshops and they say, well, of course, nothing I would love more than to stock more translated books, but you know what readers are like. There is always an anxiety that someone else, no one ever says, oh, well, I don't like foreign books, or weird books, or different books. No one ever says that. But everyone is slightly nervous on other people's behalf. All the more so when you're talking about children, when there are extra layers of people getting in the way between somebody writing this book, in this case, Costa Rica, and some poor kid in London who would probably love it if the 37 adults in the way all thought it was a good idea to get a copy of this book.
On to something that Danny said as well, but about groundbreaking layouts or formats of books, but I would say actually that Emily Granton is quite unusual and groundbreaking, and that's one thing I quite like about this. It's sort of in a similar way. It's very 3D, sort of multi-dimensional sort of book. It's a meta book, sort of, and I like that playfulness. I think there is a place for that, but I think another challenge, not a linguistic challenge, but a challenge of pitching or sort of finding a place or the right sort of readership for this book is the other way in which we sort of classify picture books as being for a particularly younger or like preschool readership, whereas actually I think beautiful picture books like this, should be for a much wider readership. But yeah, on a more of a textual level, some of the challenges, I didn't actually come across as many challenges in terms of the accessibility of the language or the sort of cultural languages, cultural preconceptions, that sort of thing. I didn't find that as much as I expected to, actually. I sort of imagined that I might come across it being somehow more old-fashioned in an approach to issues. But actually, in this book, the matter of a disability is actually not explicitly mentioned at all in the words. So there's one level of the words which is actually very simplistic and sort of emotionally quite sparse as well. There's not a lot of explanation of what's going on, but the emotional level and the reaction is actually in the pictures. And so in terms of the language, it's actually relatively straightforward. In both this book and the one about reading, which I translated, one of the issues that I came across that sort of took a bit more thought was how to present the cultural, the way they present school. And in the other book, one of the sentences, there was a bit about a boy doing his homework, and actually the way that homework is described in Arabic is quite sort of like learning by rote. So he says he went home to memorize his lessons or to memorize his poems, and that I tweaked because I didn't want to place that emphasis on it being particularly old-fashioned, onerous sort of learning. The point of that sentence was that he was doing his homework, which in general he found difficult, not because it was memorizing, but because it was he had a personal challenge with literacy. So I think sometimes a particularly culturally specific phrase can sort of put too much undue emphasis or focus on a sentence where actually it's not really needed. I was happy that actually that didn't happen so much in this book. But perhaps culturally the biggest step is the fact that in this school it's quite an old-fashioned sort of setting, and the girls line up outside the classroom in height order. I mean, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily an Arab world thing, whereas English schools don't do that. Of course, any teacher could arbitrarily say that. This is what we're doing to keep things tidy and ticking over in the classroom. The point is not that's a cultural issue. Do we understand it or not? It's just that's the scenario of this particular book, and how do those girls deal with it? So I think it's on the whole, it's a very universal book. There's nothing specific.